Predict, pick, and prevail in your fantasy football leagues with Nick Giacobbe and Nick Cap. From breakouts to busts, superstars to sleepers, these are the guys that will help you achieve fantasy glory. This is the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast.
Welcome everybody to Season 2, Episode 75 of the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast, where we give you our predictions, our picks, with the hopes that we help you prevail throughout the second round of the fantasy football playoffs and the rest of the 2022 fantasy football season. I'm your host, Nick Giacobbe. Joining me is Nick Cap. Nick, we're recording late Wednesday night for a Thursday/Friday show. It's a mega show going into the weekend. We have basically every game on Saturday, Thursday night, and a few on Sunday. How are we feeling? Do you feel like there's going to be a fantasy Grinch coming to your house, or do you feel like you're going to get a couple big presents this weekend?
I feel the Grinch coming.
Oh boy, so do I.
Between Jonathan Taylor and Jalen Hurts, I'm hurting in all three of my playoff leagues.
Yeah.
So, this is pretty rough.
Well, I'm only alive in one league now. The last time we recorded, I guess, was Monday night. I lost thanks to Baker Mayfield, who's a piece of shit. That interception cost me my 13-1 league. Top three scorer on the league on the week, lost by 1 point, and that's and I win the points by 250, but that team goes down the drain, and it just reiterates my point that the best team never ever wins the championship. Does not happen. I stick to that. So anyway, but I still have one league. It's not my best league, so I'm probably going to lose in the second round, but it is what it is. So. With that said, if this is your first time listening to us, thank you so much. We do the show during the season. It's Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. Next week is only going to be 2 episodes, because I'll be home for the holidays and, scheduling stuff. But we'll still have all the fantasy content that you need to get ready for your championship. We also normally do a live show, which would be on Sundays because football Sundays. But this week, it's going to be on Saturday for Christmas Eve. It's going to be a Christmas Eve special, 9:30 a.m. Eastern time, because there's 11 games on Saturday. So we're going to do Saturday. Join us at 9:30. YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. The YouTube and Facebook is PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast. The Twitter is PrimeTimeFFPod. This is the perfect opportunity to ask your fantasy questions, to help with your fantasy lineups, tough decisions, waiver wire pickups, defenses to stream. This is where you want to be, 9:30 a.m. Eastern time. So don't miss that this Saturday. Really excited about that. Not really excited that I won't have my fancy camera or my ring light or my microphone, as I'll be, again, I'm a New Yorker at heart, and I'll be at my family house for Christmas. So I won't have my setup, which kind of sucks, but it's okay. Gonna have a lot of fun with it anyway. So you can find all of our shows on all audio streaming platforms: iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Anchor. If you're on iTunes or Spotify, please give us a 5-star rating and a review. If you'd rather watch and listen to the show, go to our YouTube channel, PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast. If you're watching this video, hit a like on it. If you're watching any future videos, hit a like on those. Drop a subscription, share the links, and get your league involved, get your friends involved, help grow the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast. Keep connecting and interacting with us on social media, PrimeTimeFFPod on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. Then Facebook and YouTube is PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast. Moving on to injury updates and news, the first segment of the show. Again, this is injury updates and news as of Wednesday. And it's really a Thursday because the players that are practicing on Wednesday, like Thursday would be their Friday practice. So it's really not that much different. So anyway, 2 bits of news. First off, Nick Foles is starting for the Colts. Matt Ryan has now been benched by 2 different coaches for 2 different quarterbacks, I believe. And that's pretty bad. That's a testament on Matt Ryan. I think he's going to retire after this year.
I would have to think so. I can't imagine him sticking it out for one more.
I also feel like this kind of hurts everybody on the Colts. I don't know if I want to play Michael Pittman. You may have to. I mean, it's not a bad matchup, but I don't love it. Pittman's probably the only playable Colt. Maybe Zach Moss, depending on how deep your league is and if you lost Jonathan Taylor. But I'm not really excited to play any Colts at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, because of how rough 2 of my situations are, I have to start Zach Moss and Deion Jackson in a league, which is not fun. But it is what it is. I mean. Yep. Good luck. That's all I got to say for that one.
And lastly, Trace McSorley is going to start for the Arizona Cardinals on the Sunday Night Football game against the Bucs. This is the Bucs get-right game before the playoffs. They're going to hang 40 on them probably. The defense is going to look like, the steel curtain. It's going to be pretty bad. This hurts every Cardinal, and I kind of want to avoid every Cardinal if I can, honestly.
Yeah, I'm on board with that.
Yep. Moving on to injuries, players that did not practice as of Wednesday. Again, a lot of these players are playing on Saturday, which means that their last practice would probably end up being on Thursday. Lamar Jackson with the knee, probably out. Jalen Hurts with the shoulder, that's a bad sign. Nick Chubb with the foot, that's a bad sign. Chris Olave with the hamstring, that's a very bad sign. Don't like hammies. Deontay Johnson with the toe. Najee Harris with the hip. Kenneth Walker with an ankle. Tyler Lockett with a hand. I'm worried about everybody. I am.
Yeah.
And this might be that Kareem Hunt game that you've been waiting for. If you stash Kareem Hunt.
I picked up Kareem Hunt in a league where he was dropped last week because it's a league where I lost Jonathan Taylor. It might have saved my season.
Yeah. So there will be one more practice on Thursday. So just look at the practice report and see who practices and who doesn't. Limited practice, that means most of these guys will probably play Saturday or Sunday whenever their game is. Cortland Sutton with the hamstring, Hayden Hurst with the calf, Tyler Huntley with the shoulder, David Njoku with the knee, Traylon Burks with a concussion, not sure if he cleared protocol yet, Brock Purdy with the ribs and oblique, Christian McCaffrey with the knee, Jeff Wilson with the knee, Jacoby Myers with the shoulder, and Ramondre Stevenson with the ankle. Not really worried about any of these guys. Cortland Sutton's the only one that kind of worries me because of the hamstring, but he did practice, so. Full practice. Mr. Limited was not limited in practice with a concussion. He looks to square off against his Rams, which have always been a tough matchup for him. T. Higgins with the hamstring. He should be fine. And Josh Allen with the elbow. So we can move on to Thursday Night Football. Not much to say about that. So normally on our Thursday show, we talk about Thursday Night Football last, but since we're dropping the show on Thursday and it's basically a Friday show as well, we'll talk about Thursday Night Football first for those of you listening on Thursday. If you're not listening on Thursday, you could look at the timestamps in your audio streaming device or on YouTube, and you could skip to our Boom and Bust teams. So it is Knicks New York Jets against the Jacksonville Jaguars. It's a much bigger game than I think we could have guessed like 10 weeks ago. Yeah. Jaguars are competing for the NFC South, and Knicks Jets are competing for a wild card spot. So, yeah, it's a pretty big game, I think. Zach Wilson, 15.7 points, Nick. We were debating on our Tuesday show, I believe, how many quarterbacks you play Zach Wilson over. So, what do you think? Is that a solid number?
I would lean on the over here, but I'm still not totally comfortable playing Zach Wilson. Like, I get it. He's still I know he wasn't technically a backup quarterback, but he is technically a backup quarterback now, taking over the starting role. It is a favorable matchup. Which does give me a slight lean. And last week he went for 320 yards and 2 touchdowns against another favorable matchup. So prime time up against I don't want to say a rival because there's no rivalry there, but I mean they've been competing for the one pick in the draft for like multiple years now. These two organizations. I think Zach Wilson has the slight edge here. I think I'm going to give him a good shot to hit the over, but not comfortably. I think it's going to be a struggle to get to the over.
I say the under right around 14. I think the Jags D has looked a little bit more improved as of late. So it depends on how healthy they are and how they play against this Jets offense. But I wouldn't bet on the Jets offense. The Jets D is phenomenal, but the offense, I'm not going to bet on the Jets offense in most weeks. I did against the Lions because of the Lions. Trevor Lawrence, he's been a top 10 quarterback on the year. He looked really good against that Cowboys defense last year, which is a pretty ferocious defense. That front seven's no joke. So, yeah. Your thoughts on 16.7? 16.4, I'm sorry.
I think he's been so good this year where it's very hard to say under, and he's been on one of the hottest streaks that he's been on. I'm taking a look at, since week 9, he only has one game under 16.4, and it's 16.36. So, he's been very consistent, and he's heated up these last 4 weeks. But I do think the Jets top 10.
His last real game under 16 was against Denver in London, and Denver's a top defense like the Jets.
Yeah, and the other bad game is Philly. So, yeah. For me, those are 3 of the 5 best defenses in football.
Yep.
The Jets are top 10 against the quarterback position on the year.
Yep.
I don't think the weapons are good enough to create enough opportunity for Trevor. If I had either or the quarterbacks in this game, I would lean Wilson, but I do acknowledge Trevor's ceiling's probably higher. But I think he's gonna go slightly under this.
I'm gonna lean Trevor here over Zach Wilson. If I had both, I'd play Trevor. I think he outscores him by a couple points, probably 3 or 4. But I like Trevor's weapons more. And like I said, I'm not going to bet on the Jets offense. Garrett Wilson's been phenomenal, but like Elijah Moore, I don't think he's anything crazy. You don't really trust the running backs. So I'm not going to bet on the Jets offense. The Jags offenses look pretty good this year. I mean, Zay Jones, they paid him a good chunk of money, and he's at double-digit fantasy points like 4 or 5 straight weeks. They paid Christian Kirk a lot of money. He's a top 20 fantasy wide receiver. ETN has showed a lot of upside this year. I know after the injury, he's been up and down, but I think he had 100 yards last week still. Didn't have a great fantasy day because he didn't catch a lot of balls, but I think he still had 100 yards, just didn't have a touchdown. And Evan Ingram as well has had a little bit of a career resurgence. So I'll take the pieces around Trevor against that Jets defense over the pieces around Zach Wilson over, against the Jags defense. So moving on to the running backs, Zonovan Knight is projected at 11.7.
Yeah, I would smash the over here. I think he's going to be one of the locks of the week. He's going up against one of the worst teams against the run. Tony Pollard, Zeke absolutely cooked them last week. I know that they had the massive comeback week. But the bottom 10 against the run, Zonovan Knight, he's been extremely consistent. I told you very well last week, don't trust the 3-game consistency of over 13 points. The Detroit defense, I know it says bottom 10 or top 10. Well, they were the worst team against the running back up until like 8 weeks ago. They've shut down stars. The Jags are the exact opposite. They're letting up a lot of yards, a lot of touchdowns to running backs. I think Zonovan Knight is a lock here. I would smash the over on this one.
Yep, I agree with you. How about Travis Etienne at 13.9?
On the flip side, I'm absolutely busting him.
It's actually at 12.7 now. I just checked. I'm on ESPN. It's actually projected 12.7 as of now.
I'm still going with the under. I mean, the Jets have been a top 10 team against every position group outside of tight end. It's going to be extremely hard for Etienne to move the ball and Jacksonville entirely, which is going to lead to less scoring games. I think it's an under game for sure. Over the last 5 games of ETNs, he only has one over that 12.7 number. So there's no way, or one game at that 12.7. So there's no way I could take the over here.
Yeah, I agree with you. And he's not catching enough balls to even justify this over to me. I think he could rush for 100 yards, but it's only 10 points. So on to the wide receivers. Garrett Wilson, 13.2. I feel like he's had over this number for like 5 straight weeks or something like that.
He's putting up the yards, but with Wilson, he's not putting up the touchdowns. So the last 4, he's over 13.8. So I am going to take the over here. But again, like Zach, I do think it's going to be like a struggle to get there. I don't think you're going to feel comfortable at halftime, but at the end of the game, you're going to be like, all right, it could have been worse.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Christian Kirk, 13.3.
He's getting absolutely clamped. There is absolutely no way I would roll Christian Kirk out on the field, out on my fantasy field.
I don't like it either. How about Zay Jones, 12.8?
I'd prefer Zay Jones to Christian Kirk in this matchup, but again, like I can't ride the 2 hot weeks for the rest of his season being mediocre and very streaky. Top defense. We've told you the numbers. Trevor got shut down by Denver and the Eagles. There's no way I'm going to trust him here.
Yep. Tight ends, Tyler Conklin. His number is 7.4.
He got absolutely outshadowed and outclassed by CJ Uzomah last week. I would take the under here. It's touchdown or bust, and even Uzomah is like 3-point projection. I would bet the over, but I wouldn't want to play either.
Right. And Evan Ingram.
Here's where I think
his number is 10.5. By the way.
Here's where I think that he has this is where I think the Jaguars' bright spot could be on Thursday. He has 3 straight games over 14 points. A lot of high ceiling. He has 32 targets over the last 3 weeks. He's a must start in every format. The Jets are average against tight ends. I would smash Evan Ingram on the over here.
That's why I'm actually going to take the under. He's not that consistent. I'm taking the under. Moving on to our Week 16 all-boom team, players who think could boom in Week 16 for the second round of your fantasy football playoffs. Nick, who is our all-boom quarterback?
We hate this guy.
I think you just gotta relax if you got him in your lineup. Just gotta relax.
You gotta relax.
Gotta
yeah,
relax.
That's a good line. We are going with Aaron Rodgers going up against the Miami Dolphins Sunday, 1:00. The Miami Dolphins allow the second most points to quarterbacks, and Aaron Rodgers, I know he hasn't looked like the MVP for the last 2 years, but this past week he looked pretty good coming off the bye, and I think that Green Bay offense is clicking a lot more. The Packers are in a must-win situation. Aaron Rodgers is going to have his foot on the gas. It's very possible that we see a massive shootout between these two teams, which is just more opportunity for Rodgers and those receivers to succeed. On top of that, this is the first time where they've had Romeo Doubs and Christian Watson playing at their peak and both of them being healthy out on the field. I think you saw it last week. They were able to move the ball against against LA, who tends to be a tougher team against receivers with Jalen Ramsey out there. They were able to move the ball pretty easily. And with Miami having no real secondary back there, I think you're going to see a massive game for Rodgers, probably his best game of the year.
Yep, I agree with you. I mean, I put the notes in. Well, not all of them. Nick did a bit of notes, but I did create.
Most of these are Nick's picks because this Nick was a little busy, but
I did create the team. So the players are my idea at least. I don't even know if Nick agrees with most of the players. We're ringing it. First running back that we're going to boom is Devin Singletary. And we love playing the matchups, and the Bears allow the 7th most fantasy points to running backs. Singletary's also had 4 out of his last 6 games over double-digit fantasy points. So you're betting on something that's been a bit of a short thing over the last 6 weeks. The last few weeks, the Bills have been trying to just win the games and not blow opponents out, but this is the Bears, and they're injured. The Bears aren't playing to win. I think it's going to be a positive game script for Singletary because the Bills will be up a couple scores and they'll be able to run the ball a little bit more with Singletary. His floor is actually pretty safe. He's been scoring about 9 to 17 points the entire season. It's a perfect for playoff fantasy football because you're going to need a guy in your lineup that's going to have that safe floor, especially if you're missing Jonathan Taylor. In my dynasty league, I'm still competing for points. So with that said, I could put Singletary in there now and know that he's still going to get me like 10 to 15 points. So I'm not against that. Who is our second all-boom running back for this week?
We are going with Najee Harris, a guy that's caught a lot of slack on social media this season, with people saying he absolutely sucks and I should have never drafted him in fantasy. Sure, you shouldn't have drafted him in fantasy because he's not executing for his 5th overall pick, but he still is the RB15, and he has been incredibly consistent during the season, just not worth the ADP. Since week 6, he has scored over 9.9 points in every single one of those games. And on top of that, he's going up against the Las Vegas Raiders, who have allowed the 5th most points to the running back position. Last week, he went up against Ramondre Stevenson and the Patriots. What did Stevenson do? 170 yards with absolutely no problem. On top of that, Najee scored 4 touchdowns, has 5 touchdowns over the last 5 weeks, scored a touchdown in 4 out of the 5 games. So he's getting a lot of that work back near the goal line. And his usage, of course, has been consistent. I mean, he only has 1 game under double-digit carries, and in that game, he still managed to find double-digit points from getting 6 targets in the receiving game. So consistency is there, high ceilings there for this kind of matchup. I think he's an absolute smash play that I think is going to get a lot of hate. That's been getting too much hate during the course of the year.
Okay. Our first all-boom wide receiver, I'm going with my guy DK Metcalf, face off against the Kansas City Chiefs, who have allowed the 6th most fantasy points to wide receivers. The Seahawks are going to get blown out. It's going to make my Christmas Eve a bit miserable, but honestly, they're 1 o'clock games, so I can kind of forget about it by the time I even get to Christmas Eve dinner, as long as my flight doesn't get canceled. No Tyler Lockett. Lockett's been really consistent. Geno's trusted him a lot and gone to him a lot, but no Lockett means more reps for DK. And also Marquise Goodwin, if you play like daily fantasy, that might be a sneaky good play. DK has 7 straight weeks over 12. So that's like the model of consistency right there. He doesn't really have bust games. So again, same thing with fantasy football, like Devin Singletary. There's a safe floor. I think your floor is 12 and your boom potential is up to 24, 30, depending on the kind of scoring system that you're in. This could be a really, really big DK game, and we'll see what happens. But I think this could be a big DK game. So who is our second all boom wide receiver for the week?
We are going with Darius Slayton. He's going up against the Minnesota Vikings, who allow the 3rd most points to the wide receiver position. I know he's been in a little bit of a slump these past 2 games against Philly and Washington, who are both top 10 against the wide receiver position. But in the prior 6 games, he has 5 of those 6 games were over 12 fantasy points. So he's had the consistency there outside of the tough matchups. Now he goes against Minnesota, who's one of the worst teams. On top of that, even though he's had this rougher stretch, his workload has still been consistent. Before the bye week, in his 5 games before, which is where he saw the most points or the biggest stretch of points, he only had 24 targets during that span. During the rest of the course of the season, he still has an additional 38. So he's still getting the workload that you need. He's just not putting up the numbers. And in a favorable matchup like this, you expect the targets and the catches to get a lot closer to the same. So I do think he is a very good play this week, and I do think he should be started. if he's one of those guys that you're flipping and flopping on with one of your other mid-level receivers.
Okay. I'm going to take the guys on the opposite side in that Seattle game. In the flex spot, I'm going to go with Jerick McKinnon. He's had over 30-plus fantasy points the last 2 weeks, a total like 66 fantasy points, which is absurd. Seattle Seahawks have allowed the 4th most fantasy points to running backs, making both McKinnon and Pacheco good plays this week. But also, McKinnon's been catching a lot of balls. 17 targets over the last 2 weeks, averaging 130 all-purpose yards in the last 2. The Seattle Seahawks allow the 2nd most fantasy points. They allow the 4th most fantasy points to running backs, or the 4th most reception yards and receptions to running backs over most of the season, at least. So this is a perfect opportunity to play McKinnon. If you picked him up a couple of weeks ago and you've been reaping the rewards, like it's just going to keep coming, and he's going to bring you to a fantasy football championship. So who is our second flex play this week on the All Boom team? We are going with a guy that I can't believe I have to say, but I do agree that he is a smash play this week. It's the guy neither of us love. He's not been fun to play. He's not been fun to roster. But I'm sorry, you got to roll him out against the Lions. Give us DJ Moore. He's been absolutely inconsistent. I know, but last week he managed to put up 20 fantasy points, or 18 fantasy points, 73 yards, a touchdown, 5 catches. Pretty solid performance against Pittsburgh, who's one of the tougher teams against wide receiver, or at least a lot tougher than the Detroit Lions are. And the Lions just came off a game allowing a lot of points to Garrett Wilson in his first game, connecting back with Zach Wilson. Zach Wilson had his most yards in any game this season in that matchup. So I absolutely expect Sam Darnold to go out there and maybe have a solid day. The last time that Sam Darnold played the Detroit Lions was his rookie debut, where the Jets managed to post up 48 points against that defense. You might throw a pick 6 in there, but that doesn't matter for DJ Moore's stats. I think you got to play him this week, and trust the guy who maybe you haven't been able to trust all year. Yep, I agree. I'm going to go with Mark Andrews, who's been in a bit of a slump lately for a tight end. And he hasn't really been a must start, but you're starting him almost based off name value. However, this week he has a good matchup. The Atlanta Falcons, who allow the 4th most fantasy points to tight ends. He's going to be the number 1 receiving option. They've also allowed top 5 points to receivers throughout the entire year. I know he's not a receiver, but he'll be the number 1 receiving option over there. Last week, Juwan Johnson was basically a no-name in the league, in fantasy football, had 22 fantasy points against the Atlanta Falcons. So I think this week, J.K. Dobbins and Mark Andrews are both good plays. If you drafted Andrews early and you've been, frustrated, if you made it to round 2 and you're frustrated, don't doubt him now. I think this is the week you could unload him onto your opponent and have a really good matchup. Moving on to the Week 16 all-bust team. Who's going to be our bust quarterback for this week? We're rolling out Dakota Prescott, Skip Bayless's guy. And I'm sorry, Skip Bayless's guy, but you've been pretty trash over the last 4 weeks. 7 interceptions. The one thing Dak never did was turn the ball over, and he's got 7 over the last 4 weeks. The last time that the Cowboys faced the Eagles, I know it was Cooper Rush, so it's hard to compare. He put up 5 points and 3 interceptions. This is a team that's forcing within the top 5 in turnovers per game. It's going to be an ugly day for Dak Prescott. On top of that, over that 4-week stretch, he only has 1 game over 17 fantasy points for your fantasy playoffs. You absolutely need those smash plays, and Dak's not that. It's going to be a very rough game for him, and I do think you'll see it on the lower side. I think both defenses will prevail, whether Jalen Hurts is in there or Gardner Minshew. So for Dak, it's really not going to be the matchup you want. Next week against Tennessee, I wouldn't be surprised if he wound up in the all-boom team, but for this matchup, it ain't the one to play Dak. Yep, I agree. Let's keep it in the same game right there. I'm going to go with Miles Sanders. The Cowboys allow the 2nd most fantasy points to running backs. Second least amount of points to running backs. I'm sorry. So the 2nd toughest defense against running backs. He did have 14 last time he faced Dallas, which is a pretty solid number, but the Cowboys are a better football team, and it's almost like the roles are reversed. Jalen Hurts might miss the game, or he's going to be banged up, and Dak Prescott was out the last time. You could really see a totally different football game than we saw back in, I think it was week 7 or 8. If Hurts is playing, right? I mean, is not playing. It could get ugly. Gardner Minshew against that Cowboys defense, I don't love it. Game script could get pretty bad. With that said, Miles Sanders may not crack double-digit fantasy points. Who is our second all-bust running back this week? I gave you a team you love to. I was just going to say the way I was going to start this take was, Nick, are you playing Joe Mixon in any leagues this week? I am not.
Okay, because whatever happens for the Bengals, it's usually the opposite when I make the take. So I thought you were trying to reverse juju yourself there and give you some luck going into your matchup. But yeah, it's Joe Mixon.
Oh no, I'm dead serious about this take. This is one I loved.
I agree with the take, but now I know he's absolutely popping off because I'm talking about him negatively. New England allows the second least amount of points to running backs. He only had 10 points last week against Tampa Bay, who is one of the upper teams in the league. And the New England Patriots just held Josh Jacobs to 13, his lowest game since week 9 and lowest yards since week 10. Also, in his last 3 games, he has not been healthy. He's only eclipsed 22 rushing yards once. He has not eclipsed 14 rushing attempts. His targets have been down over his last 3 games. He has not eclipsed 13 points, which is right around his projection for the week, a little bit higher than that actually. So if you're going under your ESPN projection, for me, that's an absolute bust. So it's not even like it's touchdown or bust for Mixon. Like it could be a very, very rough game for him.
Yeah.
If he doesn't find the end zone.
Yep, I totally agree. Wide receiver busts. I'm going to start off with Hollywood Brown. The first note was that he may have Trace McSorley as quarterback, and he is. He's going to have a third string quarterback going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense, who I know the Bengals receivers hang some points in them, but it did take 5 turnovers for them to kind of hit their projections. Could they have hit their projections without them? Yes. But through that first half, they looked really good. They looked really good against the receivers. The front 7 looked good. I still think that Bucs defense is pretty solid. So solid defense going up against, Trace McSorley. It's a recipe for disaster. I think with Colt McCoy, they only scored 7 points last week or something like that. Yeah. And now they have Trace McSorley. It's just going to get worse. And for Hollywood Brown, his points keep decreasing after the injury. 10, 7, and 5. What's going to happen this time? Is it going to be 3? Is it going to be 2? So I think you have to actually bench Hollywood. This isn't what I'm worried about. This is what I'm telling you. You got to go out and bench him because he's going to put up a big stinker on Sunday Night Football. Who is our second wide receiver bust for Week 16?
We talked about him a lot earlier on the Thursday night preview, and I know you might be surprised if you're a long-term viewer. You see a Thursday night player on the all-bust team. What's happening? Super episode. You never know what could happen. Christian Kirk, you are going to be a bust this week. You will be shadowed by the one, the only, Mr. Sauce Gardner. The Jets have allowed the second least amount of points to the wide receiver position. This is a fact. He is a streaky player. That is a fact over his last 5 games. 4 points, 8 points, 19, 9, 15. Model for inconsistency. Tougher defenses will limit him, and that's exactly what the New York Jets have. The Jets have absolutely shut down a bunch of elite wide receivers, including Stephon Diggs 2 weeks ago. Christian Kirk is not on that level. Sauce Gardner, who will probably see the most snaps against Christian Kirk during the game over the entire course of the year, has only allowed 338 receiving yards and 1 touchdown. On top of that, last week when he was shadowing Amon-Ra St. Brown for most snaps, he was targeted a grand total of 0 times on the game. It is going to be a very, very ugly game for the wide receiver 1 for the Jaguars.
And moving on to the flex spots. My first bust here is Dante Foreman. Nick brought up the point last week that the Lions defense has gotten really good against the run, and they've allowed the fewest points to running backs over the past 4 weeks. For Foreman, he's had less than 10 fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 matchups. He's now splitting time and snaps with Chuba Hubbard, who's actually looked like the better running back, and outscored him a couple of those weeks. So this is another one, just I wouldn't even start him. I wouldn't feel comfortable starting him at this point. He was a late addition add after McCaffrey was cut. He had 1 or 2 good games, but there's really nothing that's telling you right now that you should start him in any leagues, especially with the bad matchup. So Hubbard's one that's going to stay on your bench, and maybe next week is a better matchup, but I don't think he's going to start in any. He shouldn't be starting in most leagues. Going into fantasy championships. So our second flex bust here, Nick, is one that you've been a little bit critical of for parts of the season at least, and you don't trust at least.
Yeah, I mean, I made a big statement after Amari Cooper's first game with Deshaun Watson, saying I don't think he's the wide receiver 1 there anymore. And it's been proven right. Donovan Peoples-Jones has taken over as the wide receiver 1. He's out targeting Amari Cooper. He has more touchdowns with Deshaun Watson. I know it's 3 games, so it's a smaller sample size, but Amari Cooper's been, not going to lie, he's been terrible with Deshaun over the course of those 3 games. 9 targets, 4 catches, 7 targets, 2 catches, 6 targets, 4 catches, has not eclipsed 60 yards, has not found a touchdown, has not eclipsed 10 fantasy points in any single one of those games. And now he goes up against the toughest defense that he's had to see all year, the New Orleans Saints. who are one of the best teams against perimeter receivers, which is where your Amari Cooper lines up on the majority of his snaps. They've only given up 6 touchdowns over the course of the year. And on top of that, he's got an injured hip. I know it's not a hamstring that lingers you as much. But later on in the game, he's definitely going to be feeling that. You're playing through an injury against a tough matchup, and you haven't eclipsed 10 points with your starting quarterback. I'm sure Amari Cooper carried a lot of people to the fantasy playoffs, but he is going to get your ass booted out if you don't put him on your bench.
Yep. So the last one we have here, our tight end, is Cole Kmet. He hasn't scored over 7 fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 matchups. The Bills also allow the third least amount of fantasy points to tight ends. They may have to throw the ball a little bit, but I don't know. I don't want to play this matchup. I'd rather go elsewhere and look for a tight end that I think has better potential for a couple catches and a touchdown. And Cole Kmet is not that tight end. Moving on to flex on them, we give you one player from each game and tell you which one you'd rather start in our flex spots. So first off, the Thursday night game, this Christian Kirk or Garrett Wilson. I think we're both going to lean on Garrett Wilson in this one.
Yep, 100%.
Moving on to Saturday, DK Metcalf or Juju Smith-Schuster.
I would go with your Seattle Seahawks. Give me DK.
I'll go with DK, but I think Juju has a really nice game as well and should be played. Devin Singletary or David Montgomery.
I know we got Singletary on the all boom, and I would like to trust it, but I do think I'm going to lean a little bit with David Montgomery here, just for he's been very consistent over the last few weeks.
Yeah, I kind of agree, but I think they're both pretty solid plays.
I agree.
Chris Olave, if he plays, if he doesn't play, there's no other flex option for the Saints, if I'm being honest with you, or Amari Cooper.
If Olave's out there, it's Olave for me.
Yeah, I agree. Rex Burkhead or Derrick Henry, LOL, because neither of these teams have flex options. So, I mean...
You liked Treylon Burks, and I think he should be coming back from the concussion now.
If Treylon Burks is in there, I'll play Treylon Burks over any Texan.
I would play Chris Moore over Treylon Burks.
He had a stinker last week. How do you trust him?
He put up 8 points.
That's a stinker.
Not great, but I don't trust
trust
Treylon Burks over that.
Treylon Burks is like 3 games over 16.
I would roll Chris Moore out there.
Why? Well, what has Chris Moore done to prove to you that he's going to help you win a fantasy football championship?
2 weeks ago, you saw that ceiling, and I think the game scripts are going to be great for him. Also, the Titans have one of the worst teams against the wide receiver. I believe the Texans are top 3 against receiver.
Yeah, but Treylon Burks last 3 weeks, 18, 17, and 9 when he got the concussion and he had the touchdown.
Let's take a look at Chris Moore's last 2 weeks, because that's as long as he's been the starter. It's a lot of Moores here. Got to find him. We have last 2 games, 22 points and 8 points, 20 targets over the last 2 weeks. So I'm gonna lean Chris Moore here.
I guess so. Okay. Darius Slayton or Adam Thielen?
Slayton, smash play.
Yeah, I'll go with Slayton. T. Higgins or Jacoby Myers?
So I actually saw, and we're gonna get a little off topic here for a second. Yep. I saw a report that that NFL scouts or anonymous NFL scouts started looking at the wide receivers in the NFL, and they wanted to rank them, like scouts from different teams, to see who hit most of the check marks. And based off the rankings from that list, according to scouts, T. Higgins is the best wide receiver in football.
Really?
Very interesting, because I wouldn't have guessed it. I know he's very talented. I wouldn't have guessed it, but I saw Jacoby Myers get -4 points for people on a 20-yard fumble. I'm going to lean on who the scouts are saying is the best receiver in football.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you. Okay. DeAndre Swift or Dante Foreman?
Swift. Foreman should be cut. I don't want to play him anymore. I don't care if he's a starter.
Interesting. I do kind of agree with you on the cutting part. Okay, let's go with Tyler Algier or J.K. Dobbins.
I would lean Algier here. I know Dobbins has been pretty solid, but Algier just came off a 140-yard rushing game. He's clearly eclipsed as the RB1 over there.
I'm going to go with Dobbins here. He's back-to-back games with 120 rushing yards, and seems like the guy they're really leaning on with that Baltimore offense when they're depleted. So I'm going to go with Dobbins here in a good matchup. Terry McLaurin or Brandon Ayuk? I don't want to play Terry, but I really don't want to play Ayuk either.
I think both these teams have very underrated defenses. The secondaries on both are especially Washington is very underrated. But
I think I'll go with Terry for the upside.
Yeah, I agree with that. Because it's the fantasy playoffs, I'd say Terry.
Miles Sanders or breakaway speed, Mr. Tony Pollard?
It's a fantastic question. Both should be started everywhere. I will lean Tony Pollard, even though I think Miles Sanders can have a phenomenal day.
Josh Jacobs or Najee Harris?
It ain't close, Josh Jacobs.
Christian Watson or Jalen Waddle?
I'll go Jalen Waddle here.
I have to go Waddle.
Yeah.
Latavius Murray or Cam Akers?
I don't like the idea of Cam Akers running into that front seven,
even though
I do think he's the better running back.
Yeah, I agree. Rashad White or James Conner on Sunday Night Football?
I'll go Conner here. I think he's looked a lot better without Kyler Murray at quarterback.
I'll go with Rashad White because it's not going to be a positive game script for Conner. And Monday Night Football, Mike Williams or Michael Pittman?
Upside all day. Give me Mike Williams.
Yep, I totally agree. Thank you guys for watching, listening to this show. That is our Thursday or Friday show, our big show to get you ready for week 16. If we did not answer all of your questions, or if you still have questions and stuff, join the live show 9:30 a.m. Eastern time. If you're listening on Thursday, it's in 2 days. Friday 1 day. Christmas Eve on Saturday 9:30 a.m. Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. The Facebook and YouTube is Primetime Fantasy Podcast. The YouTube is Primetime FF Pod. Maybe we'll have a cameo, Nick. I am going to be home with one of our listeners. Maybe we'll have a little cameo in this one.
Maybe not.
We'll see. He's going to pop for that one. Anyway, that'll be Saturday. So make sure you join us for that one. We want to help you guys win your fantasy leagues in advance this week in the playoffs. If you enjoyed the show and you're listening on an audio streaming platform like Spotify or iTunes, give us a 5-star rating and a review. If you're listening and watching on YouTube, drop a like on this video. Make sure you subscribe. Share the links with your friends and league mates. Keep connecting with us on social media, Primetime FF Pod, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook, and YouTube is Primetime Fantasy Podcast. Thank you guys for listening. We appreciate you. Best of luck in Week 16 in the second round of your fantasy playoffs, and we'll see you Saturday for the live show.